Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what is actually the last of a series of interviews that we have been organizing as part of the Chats.EU series being organized by Europe Direct Core platform. The last interview for the year, of course, because we have a number of other interviews already prepared and scheduled for the upcoming year. But I think we're going to close off with a very important topic and an extremely knowledgeable guest as well on the topic. So today we'll be discussing climate change, and to discuss this topic with us we have Dr. Alex Mifsud, who is an expert on the topic. So thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today, for finding the time, because I know you're very busy.
Hi, and thank you, and welcome everybody. And I'm really, it's been a real privilege to be invited on these chats that you are organizing, and well done for the wonderful initiative. Yeah.
Thank you. Alex, for the benefit of those who don't know you and who are not familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, and then a little bit about the work that you do?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So of course, as you said, I started my career as an environmental activist in Malta, dating back more than 25 years. Eventually, I moved into, I wanted to learn about it more, so I obviously furthered my formal education until I finally finished with a doctorate in education for sustainable development. And as a result, I've held various roles at universities, the University of Malta, but also universities in the UK. And mostly my area is educating people on different environmental and sustainability topics. In the past year, I have worked, especially during lockdown and during the pandemic, I've been heavily involved in climate education. So I worked with a team at a university in the UK, and I'm proud to say that our educational materials have just only last week won a global award on innovative approaches to sustainable education. So yeah, we're quite proud of that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I think it makes the rest of us Maltese proud as well, because it shows us that although we're small as a country, we're not small in terms of our ideas and our capabilities.
Yeah, it was a big thing because there were 1,100 nominations. So for us to get a gold was quite impressive. So I hope that I'm able to at least whet the appetite of some of the people that will be listening to our conversation on the need for climate education, regardless of the size of Malta. And perhaps many citizens will say, well, climate change is such a big thing and we are such a small island. What will it matter if we make changes? But I hope that at least I will be able to arouse some enthusiasm and motivation for people in Malta to also start doing something on climate. Yeah.
Yes. And maybe you can guide us with the very, very basics. So climate change, what is this climate change and is it real?
Yes, of course. First of all, yes, an important question is it real? Because bizarrely enough, we still have people around the world debating that. And unfortunately, as we know, with so many other scientific topics, including the pandemic, I guess, whilst we are blessed with such amazing IT and social media, we also know that social media can be a perfect platform to spread false and misinformation. And so one of the topics that has really suffered on this is climate change. And it's quite obvious if you really try to understand it, because climate change comes primarily from the burning of fossil fuels. And we do know that obviously the companies that are involved in the burning of fossil fuels are very large and very powerful global companies. So of course they have a huge interest in ensuring that we retain the status quo. And so we also know now, it has been disclosed that of course some of these companies have been putting out misinformation for years and years, from the 1980s, to say that climate change has nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuels. So yes, so it is real, but because the science is there and we know it is real. And in fact, there is a scientific platform which is called the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. It's a long word, but in short, the acronym is IPCC. So maybe some people would have heard of that. And that is made up of scientists, climate scientists and earth scientists from around the world. And their role is to analyze and collate data that is emerging on climate from around the world. And then they usually issue reports, they write reports, and many of those reports are targeted at policymakers, political leaders. So they're sort of written in a language that is, easily understood by political leaders. So they turn sort of the climate science into something that is more amenable for political leaders to really understand the severity of the situation and hopefully take action. So yes, they have said that it is real. It is inherently linked to human behavior. When you look at it from a statistical perspective, about there's 96, 97% consensus within the scientific body that climate change is linked to our behavior, to human behavior. So it is real. And what is climate change? Ultimately, yes, in a nutshell, it's the burning of, it's when you have greenhouse gases, and these are naturally occurring gases, and when they are released into the atmosphere. Now, what happens is that the way we are, greenhouse gases are important in the atmosphere because they protect us from, they keep us nice and warm. They keep our planet at a temperature that actually life can exist. If we don't have any greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the average world temperature would be -18, which means, of course, there's no existence. So greenhouse gases are not bad. They are necessary for us to survive and for the planet to survive, our planet to survive. But when we have excessive greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, staying in the atmosphere, that is where the problem is, because what happens is it increases the warmth that there is around the world, which is why we are seeing systematically an increase globally in temperatures. And this is data that we can all measure. We all can measure our daily temperature, around the world, in all countries in the world, and we can see year on year that there has been a steady increase. So now we are looking at approximately, I think in Europe, from the 19th century till today, on average, the average European temperature has increased by 2.2 degrees. It may not seem a lot, but that's a lot when it comes to the changes to our habitats and how we live. So climate science, I tried to explain it in very little, and I will go into it a little bit more as we go along.
Yes. Okay, so this is happening because we are burning too much fossil fuel, right?
Well, yes. So of course, I said that what climate change is, it's from greenhouse gases, too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Now, of course, what are greenhouse gases? Where do they come from? Greenhouse gases practically are primarily the burning of fossil fuels, which is which brings about carbon dioxide, which is what we hear most, the CO2, but it's not the only one. There are other greenhouse gases that are responsible for climate change. And these include hydrofluorocarbons, which are usually found in refrigerants and coolants. And they have a high, what we call global warming potential, which means that, in other words, hydrofluorocarbons, in other words, those gases in refrigerants that we currently use, but they're being phased out, thankfully, they have a higher potential to warm our Earth. So that's why we call it global warming potential. In other words, they're more potent compared to carbon dioxide, which is from burning of fossil fuels. The only problem, and this is why we mostly talk about carbon dioxide, is that unfortunately carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for far, far longer. So that is why it's kind of like the baddie of all the greenhouse gases. Another greenhouse gas is methane. And methane is released from the decomposition of bio-waste. And that could be in sewage, in landfills, which is why the European Union has a directive which enables countries, or rather forces countries, to divert biodegradable waste from going to landfill, which is why, for example, like in Malta, we have initiatives like the collection of organic waste from households, because if that goes to landfill, it is released as methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas. So it will contribute to climate change. So the less as households we throw away our food waste, and whether we are restaurants, hoteliers, food producers, the less that goes to waste, the better. And of course, it comes from methane is released, unfortunately, also in livestock, especially cows. And they are unfortunately big culprits. So again, I will touch upon this further on as you go ahead.
Okay, no, so linking to what you have just said, and also to what you said in the beginning, is the fact that climate change is primarily caused by human behavior. So which are those actions which perhaps we carry out on a day-to-day basis in our lives, which are creating all of this? And I think without most of us being aware of it and without realizing, because we are kind of creating our own problem, no? With the way we live.
Yeah. So of course, again, if you look at the three things I've mostly mentioned, which are one, the burning of fossil fuels. So that's usually why do we burn fossil fuels? For energy. And that's obviously for energy for our homes and our everything, our buildings, our hospitals, our factories, etc. Also, a little aside, cement production is very contributes highly to greenhouse gases. But I'm just going to park that one a little bit, but it is also because it links a lot to construction industry. So there we have a lot to do in that aspect. But if we look at the burning of fossil fuels for energy, so like for us to travel or to keep our houses or our buildings, functioning. And as businesses, as organizations, as individuals, of course, the important thing is to really reduce our energy consumption and build in an energy efficient way, choose energy efficient appliances. That is our main priority. And of course, car travel, and I can't not mention this, especially in Malta, where it's so tiny and practically it could easily be a walkable city where people walk rather than use their cars. So of course, yes, the diesel and petrol engines are a huge contributor to obviously CO2 emissions. So we need to we need to look at also the way we move, and of course aviation. But I'm not saying that we can continue to fly as if there's no tomorrow, because our air miles are contributing a lot to climate change, and they will contribute significantly to our carbon footprint. But something which is much simpler to do, and actually it has a huge impact, it has a very high impact, is something that we do on a daily basis. We all eat food. And so it's a really easy way to look at what we eat and our relationship with food. First and foremost, because of beef and because of the fact that meat-based products are usually high emitters of carbon dioxide, methane, etc., and greenhouse gases. We need to shift quite significantly to a more plant-based diet. Just to support that suggestion, we do know the Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 50% of the carbon that is naturally stored in the soil, which is where it should stay rather than released into the atmosphere, that has happened. It's been released into the atmosphere. 50% of it has been released in the last century, and that is because we've converted forests and natural grasslands to crops, and these crops are to feed cattle, and the cattle is for meat industry. Right? So that is a huge percentage, and we have a massive impact there. So if we shift to a more plant-based diet, it's one of the highest impact actions that we can take. Of course, car travel, again, it's a really important one. Because again, the Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 1/3 of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are emitted come from agriculture. So we really need to look at our relationship with food. We need to see how we eat, what dishes we choose, what ingredients we use, but also, of course, to make maximum use of our food production. So less food waste, right from the farm right up to our plates, along the chain. Looking at it globally, unfortunately, a lot of food waste occurs in the farm sector, in the field, in countries that are lacking financial resources, so in the poorer regions of the world, because they don't have the means to store or to transport their produce. So they end up whatever they can carry on their head or on their shoulder to the market, and the rest just is wasted. So unfortunately, they're the ones that need most food and the income from that little piece of land they have, but unfortunately it's being wasted. So again, regions like the European Union, this is where it needs to give aid, monetary aid to countries for them to have less food waste, but it also helps them to reduce poverty and hunger. Then the Western, like the richer countries, food waste does not happen there because we've got the means, the technology, the refrigerators to store our food produce, but then we waste further down the chain during food production, you know, in factories, and then in hospitality sector and in food service sector and in our homes. So if we are to plan our meals better, whether I'm a restaurant owner or whether I'm just a household, you know, to try and keep our food waste down, and then it would really help.
And I presume this is also because we tend to overconsume quite a bit. If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I believe one of the goals is responsible production and consumption, not just the production side. And I think in the Western world, perhaps more, we tend to overconsume, partly because maybe we have more financial means, so we're not as careful to buy just what we need, and we're just kind of happy to throw the extra away.
Yeah. So really, it is a mind shift, you know, a shift in our mindset. For us to address climate change, we need to sort of really look at how we are living and learn to sort of live with less. Automatically that will put it down, that will bring down our what we call carbon footprint. But it's amazing. I mean, when I do this carbon, the climate education, like we call it carbon literacy training, and I do it with universities across Europe and beyond. Most of the participants, they are horrified to see that, you know, I give them two recipes, a plant-based one and a meat-based one, which are normally, you know, most households would cook. And they see the difference. You know, one of them has beef and the other one is a vegetarian pasta dish. And the difference in the CO2 emissions of those dishes is phenomenal. You know, it's literally double the beef.
Oh, wow.
I give them like a beef curry, you know, so with rice. But again, rice is high end because it releases methane in the paddy fields.
Oh.
Yes. So we need to keep rice as a staple food for those regions that desperately need it as food. And we try to keep rice as a luxury ingredient. But that's a huge mind shift for us. Yes, and we need to...
I wasn't even aware of that in relation to rice. Beef I knew, but rice I had no idea, to be honest.
Yes. So again, you know, so these are things that we need to look at. And so it's so easy to make the change, you know, and then also there are carbon calculators that you can look at online, you know, a lot of them are quite reliable. And then you can just look at a recipe and say, okay, what if instead of doing a beef curry, what if I do a chicken curry instead? And again, even though it's a meat dish, still it reduces your carbon footprint. So we don't have to be too radical. But at the same time, it's our ability to be open to change. I think that is what's important. Yeah. It doesn't mean we all have to suddenly, you know, live by candlelight and so on. But luckily, we have technology to help us. Again, one of the high impact solutions is look around your homes and your buildings and change, you know, to LED lighting. That is a massive carbon footprint reduction. It really helps for climate change. Insulation, you know, making your homes more better insulated. Things that doesn't mean we're going to live uncomfortably, but yes. I think in Malta also, for example, in the summer, it's really important to watch, just like in cold countries, they have the problem in reverse. It's in the winter, where it's normal in cold countries, they turn the heating up so high that then people are just in a t-shirt in the middle of December.
Yes.
And that's a waste of energy, but also it costs money. So, you know, and the Maltas, they are into the reverse. In the summer, again, most people are working in offices where the air conditioning is going full on and really high. So bringing the temperature really low, and people are having to wear jumpers in August.
It's true, I have seen that.
Yes, I have too in Malta, and I find it absolutely horrific. But so these are ways of how we can take action. Yeah.
Alex, I agree with everything that you've said so far. However, I am aware that most people would say, all well and good, but we're all very busy with our lives. We need to go to work. We need to look after our families. We need to do the shopping and everything, that life throws at us. And people might think, why is this my problem to solve at the end of the day? Isn't it the government's responsibility to solve this problem? Or would it make more sense for, let's say, the authorities to focus more on the businesses who have a sort of quite larger negative impact? Mm-hmm. What would be your response to that?
I would say everybody plays a part, people in leadership roles, whether they're political leaders, business leaders, and faith leaders, religious leaders, anybody that is in a leadership position where they are in a position of influence and we are there in a position to take decisions, they have a massive role to play, because they are the ones, say, in organizations or whatever they lead, be it a country or a business or a church or a faith, they are the ones that then can draft policies that help the rest to move in that direction. So they are the ones that can provide the vision, but also they can provide, if, for example, it's political leaders, they can provide the funding, the support, the financial, grants to help the transition. Mm-hmm. So they play a role. Educational institutions play a role, of course, and I am biased because I come from an educational background, but I see, for example, I do a lot of this training with business schools. It means they are the faculties for economics, business studies, etc. And a lot of the academics that I train, and then they embed these ideas into their lectures, because they know that their students are going to end up holding positions in businesses. And then I get some of those students that they've graduated and they come to me and say, well, we're now working, and guess what? We want to try and convince our leaders to do something about climate. So education has a really, plays a key role in this kind of domino effect, to bring it forward. Mm-hmm. As individuals, we all consume, as we've already mentioned. So we also play a role, and each of us, when we look at some of the calculators, as I said, if we swap one beef-based dish to a vegetarian-based dish once a week, and we're feeding maybe 4 people, and that with that one dish, you've lowered your carbon footprint by half, and maybe if you multiply that by 4 people, and then every week you eat that dish, and then it's really there. And as individuals, we all have another role, not just in our personal lives. We all somehow work somewhere, or volunteer somewhere. And we can use that to pivot things, towards climate actions. So it could be I volunteer for a scout group, and then you can start introducing perhaps, more plant-based food when they go on camping, trips, or do things, raise awareness amongst the children in the scout group. So there's always ways of how we can all play a role.
I also find that a lot of these changes in behavior, whether it's within a business setting or in a household setting, very often they have a sort of win-win dimension to them, in the sense that, for example, if we start shifting more towards a plant-based diet, it's good for the environment, but it's probably also better for our health, and I would say possibly also for our pockets, no?
Yes, that's a really good point, because in fact in this training I said I've designed together with the university in the UK, Nottingham Trent University, we bring this whole training to an end by looking at actually the we call them like other effects, so the other impacts. So you've got the sort of co-benefits, we call them, the co-benefits of taking climate action. So for example, if let's say there's a political leader and decide, okay, I want to reduce, our CO2 in the city. And they say, okay, so they design a city where there's more walkable and bike routes. So that removes cars from the road. So that brings down the CO2 emissions of the city. But at the same time, the co-benefits are less vehicle accidents, so less loss of lives, healthier citizens because they're all physically active. Most times, especially in big cities, it means safer streets because the more people there are walking and cycling, the safer you feel, whether you're a female or vulnerable, etc. If there's more people around you, you feel more safe to walk. So there are multiple benefits to taking climate action, and of course financial. Yes. Changing LED to LED bulbs, for example, will obviously have an impact on your energy bill. Walking rather than taking a car is obviously quite cheap, isn't it? Or taking a bike. But again, and then you need the political leaders to kind of facilitate it. Yes, so that's also. I don't want to be too kind of naive in thinking that most people feel safe cycling from point A to point B.
No. We're not at that point yet, unfortunately.
No. But there are that's why I sort of focus quite a bit on the food, because I try to focus on things that I know could be possible, without the need to wait for, I don't know, a total overhaul of the road network in Malta or something like that, something that you can do yourself.
Yes, I really liked your point about changing your meals, even if it's just once a week. So it doesn't have to be a total revolution, even if it's using the bicycle instead of the car. You don't have to do it all the time, but perhaps if you're doing something within your town or city, and that's easier to do. Whereas if you need to go, let's say, in busy roads, in the traffic, in that case, maybe you would need to take the car. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
No, exactly. And it's amazing. I mean, I speak to some of the, students at the University of Malta. Because of the traffic and because of the parking problem on campus, I literally know, and I know this from my own students who used to tell me they get to university and they park in Papara on the outskirts of the university grounds, and they get there at about 7 in the morning or earlier, and then they sleep for an hour in the car.
Oh my goodness.
And so that they turn up for their 8 o'clock lecture, because otherwise they won't find parking. And they also to beat the traffic. And I think, how healthy is that for our younger generation? I mean, I would rather sleep that extra hour if I'm honest, So again, but again, it would be great if there is better infrastructure for them to walk. And on my regular visits to Malta before COVID, I had started doing this. I started to walk from one place to another, and I realized that actually the distances are really short. I used to find myself arriving way too early because I was still thinking in the mindset of driving, and actually walking was quicker. So I still end up having lots of coffees in little bars somewhere because I arrive early for a meeting. And of course it's good for your health, but but then there's the question of air pollution. So but if everybody does this, then it's one car less on the road. So it reduces the air pollution. So it makes it just has to be more, I think people really need to be aware that if everybody starts to do it, and if one person starts, and then there's this domino effect, and then of course the impact will be much higher, and it then becomes more pleasant for you to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so to start sort of summing up, we've identified already some tangible actions that people can take. So we've mentioned being mindful of what we're eating and maybe starting to change our diets a little bit, maybe not using the car all the time and sometimes walking or cycling. We also mentioned using LED lighting. I don't know if there was anything else from a, day-to-day changes that we can make, that we can suggest.
Yes, of course, when we're choosing appliances, the ones that consume energy, of course, consume electricity. I know, of course, for many families and many households, and a lot of my students in Malta, they do kind of a lot of their work and assignments and research on this, on what would influence people's choice, the consumer's choice. And of course, price comes up at the top most times. But I would really recommend that, like, if anything, so save the money, eat a little bit less meat, because and walk a little bit instead of taking the car. So save on your car fuel, and then save that money up, and then buy an appliance which may be a little bit more expensive than what you had originally hoped to spend, and buy a, go for a high, high A star, or whatever.
That
Really
saves you
energy efficient.
money on your bills in any case eventually. So it's more like an investment that you're going to recover, no?
Yes, yes, yes. Of course, I didn't mention like solar panels, etc. But I think in Malta, that's quite something that's been taken up very positively, thanks to government intervention, because of course the grants are very encouraging on that, in that aspect. Yeah, yeah. And one final point, I think, particularly for Malta, water consumption, because to produce water in Malta, we use the reverse osmosis plants, and they are, as technology is helping, and I know that they are working on this to make more efficient reverse osmosis systems, but still they are one of the highest consumers of electricity in Malta. So the more water we use, the more electricity, and of course that means the more energy and the more CO2 emissions, because of the burning of gas from the power station. Malta does not rely on, its national grid comes from gas, so that's a fossil fuel. So yeah, that's how it works. So we have to try also to look at our water consumption.
One last, maybe provocative question, which you actually touched upon in your introduction. We're so small. Is our negative impact really what is causing the global climate change? Shouldn't we be, focusing more on what the bigger countries are doing?
Yes, thanks for that. Well, I think it's, yes, of course, everything is proportionate. So our impact is maybe negligible compared to China, to India, to the USA, which are the highest emitters in CO2. That's true. But you also have to look at, I would like to believe that the Maltese nation has this collective responsibility for others, what we call climate justice. In other words, if we want to help, and maybe for those people that have followed a little bit what went on in COP26, which was the meeting in Glasgow by world leaders, that you could see that. So it was so apparent, the countries that are suffering most from the impact of climate change are the ones that are not responsible for climate change. They are the poorer countries that don't even have, a lot of them don't even have access to energy the way we do. So they're not causing the problem, but we are creating the problem for them. So that is something important. And on one final note on this, we have to look at it in a way that if these countries end up living in countries, in regions where climate catastrophes or extreme weather events in their region, say like Kenya, etc., sub-Saharan Africa, some of the Pacific Islands, Bangladesh, India, China, if these countries in their region, it's become impossible for them to survive because they have extreme drought and everything is wiped out, they can't grow any crops, they're going to move. And we are already seeing a wave of climate migration. So obviously they're going to have to move, because it becomes, you can't live in those regions anymore. You can't grow anything. And so what can you do? How are you going to live? So that is also our responsibility, to ensure that these people are still entitled to living in their part of the world, ideally, because I think nobody wants to move just for fun. But it's our responsibility to help that we don't continue to create climate change.
Yeah. Yes, we're all interconnected at the end of the day.
Yes,
I think that's
and it's our
to understand.
Yeah, and it is our responsibility towards them. I mean, we cannot allow other people to sort of suffer at the hands of our behavior. It's up to us to really, look into that quite carefully and look at what we're doing and the impact we are having on people who are so far away from us. But at the end of the day, it's our actions.
That's right. On that note, Alex, I thank you very, very much. It's been really, really interesting. Keep up the excellent work, and hopefully we'll be able to talk again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and all the best in your project with these chats. They're great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.